Inner child, inner child, inner child, the traumas and the memories of the inner child. This is a big topic of illumination for a lot of men that I work with, for sure. I realize that my adult patterns and dysfunctions are caused because there is some kind of trapped, unintegrated and unknown child within me who has his hurts and his past memories, and it's kind of screwing things up for me as I get into adulthood. And so if I want to be able to move on in my life and really develop into my wholeness, I need to heal and integrate this inner child. What does this actually mean and how do I do it? So this can be very subtle and very tricky work, and there needs to be a starting place of real presence and real unconditional love. Without unconditional love and unconditional acceptance for any aspect of yourself and your process that comes up, then the healing is not going to take place. And of course, if the inner child wounds come up and there's another part of you that's like an inner critic, that's like, why are you feeling this? Stop it. Already you start entering into an internal war between your very earnest child's needs for vulnerability and love and parts of you that judge that. So most people actually are living most of their lives in conflicts of like the goodness and the sweetness of their trauma actually wanting to be seen and healed, and other parts of them that judge within themselves and also within other people the very same traumatized inner child parts. And often when it comes to who we judge in the world and why we judge them, usually it's the parts that we don't accept in ourselves that we see expressed in another person, and we just cannot stand that other person. Is there a problem with that other person? Maybe. But the fact that they reflect back to you a part of yourself that you feel uncomfortable to look at is actually more telling. So interestingly, the more you heal your own inner child and woundedness, the more capacity you've got to love others. So to start off with inner child work, if you're coming from a very cold start, you will probably need some really skilled, compassionate, good therapy to hold you and work through some of your self-judgment and your critic before you even become a safe enough place for your own inner wounds and your vulnerabilities to come up. If you've been doing some shadow work, some inner critic work, some self-love and some self-care work, and specifically if you hold enough of a meditative presence and you have a good frame for how this works, and you can feel your body and you can breathe a little bit, and if a little bit of traumatic material comes up, an emotional challenge comes up, you can actually be with yourself and accept and allow those feelings. If you've done some aspects of that training, you could go in and do some of your own self-child work. You might have enough resources to take this on. So how do you do it? There are lots of books that you can download with workbooks and worksheets, and that you can think about your life, and then with your mind start putting your awareness on different wounds, different memories, different things that you want to heal and move on from. And that can be really good and insightful. I mean, I'm most of my life coming from my mind, and unless you ask some good questions and make sense of what happened with a very adult and mature worldview, you won't integrate the wisdom of this trauma fully later on. So the mind does have a role. But specifically, you can work with your inner child much more emotionally and much more mystically in a way. And so a client recently asked me, what is the inner child and how does that work? And the way I see it is in the metaphor of the matryoshka, which is the Russian doll. Every stage of development in your life, you were a little figure. So you got a little baby one, and then at 1 year, you're a slightly larger doll. At 2, you're a slightly larger doll, all the way to your current adult self. We pass actually through an infinite number of stages of development, but let's just say for concrete sake, every month of your life, there is another formation of this doll, and it grows and it grows. And so say I've got an inner child part of me that is 4 years old, that has some wounding, even though the outer adult shell of myself might look like a complete human being, if I've got one of my small matryoshkas, the 4-year-old doll inside me that's taken some knocks and has lost some of its paint, or the wood is really kind of flaking away and it's really in despair, I can go in directly and look at that doll. As an adult man, I might be able to function in the world, but if my 4-year-old version of me is not healed, if something triggers me from the outside world, or I start having a memory of something that happened at this age, my entire capacity of emotional, cognitive intelligence, my ability to be with you and be present and relate, all kind of evaporates, and I become captured actually by this 4-year-old version of me. And often when you look at a couple that's in a really difficult conflict, one of the questions the therapist will ask is, how old are you feeling right now? And the children are like, the adults are like, well, I feel about 6, I feel about 5, I feel like an angry 7-year-old, I feel like a 2-year-old who's just trying to keep myself together and protect myself from angry adults. And we regress into these ages of formation, basically. So again, you can work with your inner child through analysis and asking questions, but you can also set your intention to meditate and to access immediately the Russian doll inner child in you. Everything about your present and about your past, even back through generations, is actually visible within you right now. And often when I'm coaching somebody and they come across a young part or a resistance or a wound or a trauma, I can see that there is a subtle shift in the face. And often if I look around the expression of the eyes, and often if I breathe and feel into myself, I can actually capture a sense of, yeah, I feel the emotion that they're in, and I also get that the 40-year-old man who was with me before has just gone through a very almost imperceptible and yet totally perceptible regression. And I ask him one question, he accesses one memory and emotion, and the 40-year-old man all of a sudden is entering into the 4-year-old version of himself. So we're always just one question, one good, empathetic, soft, but very precise inquiry away of accessing any of our Russian dolls. And you kind of know this is intuitively true because I can ask you, what was the major thing that happened to you when you were 17 years old or 10 years old or 3 years old? What was life like? What did you care about? We don't need to keep the conversation for you going long until you sink and you settle into the feeling states and the memories and your sense of identity of what it was like to be that age. Some mystics say they can also look at the aura of the person and see their future in how they are now. I don't know so much about that. I think that would be a wild guess of intuition if I was to engage in that level, but certainly the book of someone's autobiography is palpable and visible in their present moment state, and you're only one inquiry away from getting to some radical depth. So when it comes to inner child work, you have to have a suspicion or a curiosity that it is an unintegrated layer of your childhood development that is causing a bit of a disturbance in your adult life. If you can have that curiosity and conceive of that thought, then you can go into more of an active meditation with it. And with a trauma energy, it's kind of like a hair. You've got the visible part of trauma or the dysfunction or the emotional complex that's difficult, and you can start to spot that. It's kind of on the surface. So let's say every time your girlfriend wants to give you love or say I love you, you squirm. If a woman says when a woman says she loves me, all of a sudden I don't want to really date her anymore or be in the same room. Part of me wants to jump out of this dynamic. Okay, so you've got the very tip of that, and that's something to work with. Okay, so you want to jump out of that dynamic. And then you can sit. When I want to jump out of the dynamic with a woman, what is it that I feel? Where in my body do I feel it? Is it okay for me to feel it as I sit here and meditate? Can I breathe it in a few times and host this emotion, this feeling, and give it some space? Maybe you can not go into a strong breath work, but just bring more oxygen into it, like you're giving the emotion life, you're giving it prominence, center stage within your psyche for a few moments. Can I be with that emotion just the way it is without any need to change it? Yeah. You start holding space for your own emotional triggers with acceptance, with curiosity. And you notice how your sense of self broadens over time because you're able to sit there and witness it, and the energy or the emotion that used to knock you out and kind of punch you into some form of reactive behavior, it actually gets smaller and smaller. And then you can sit there with a partner at some point and she says, I love you. And I say, baby, I always feel fear when you say that, or I just feel this impulse to get away and it's a wounding, but I love you too. I wish that didn't happen. I just have my stuff. You see, so rather than being kicked out into reactivity, you can start to name your process and stay in connection, in adult connection with other people, even though you're a bit triggered. So that's kind of working with the top end of the trauma energy. But like I say, it's kind of like a hair, and a hair goes all the way down into the head. So you've also got the bottom end of the energy that you can work with. So that would be more like the therapeutic inquiry. Okay, what memories do I have of being 4 years old, and what was love like with my mother? Oof, when I feel into that, I see this. I see her face, I feel a particular quality of overwhelm. I remember what my mother was like. Okay, so what's the feeling exactly when you go into that? And again, if you've got strong enough meditation skills, you can take yourself here. This is what it's like in therapy and in some forms of coaching. The coach has got enough awareness that they can stay with you, guide you and stay with you at these depths when you might want to eject from the process because it's too difficult. That's the value of trauma work, is someone's offering you their presence and their unconditional acceptance in a way that you can stay in the process long enough so that it transforms and completes and heals, and then you can move on. If you're very advanced, you can do your own work in this regard because you've got enough presence. But again, remembering what it was like when you were 4 years old. Okay, where do you feel that? And what's it like in your body, the impulse to go away? What happens if you just breathe that? And so you spend as much time as it takes to become acquainted with that feeling. And that feeling might end up having a voice, or needing a voice, or it might have an action that it needs to take in order to reach completion. Often if people have invaded your boundaries when you were a child, often that's where you get the wild therapeutic moment of screaming, back off, and using your hands to set a boundary. It's kind of like you regress into this 4-year-old version of your own inner Russian doll, but now you're actively working with the 4-year-old's feelings so that the feelings come to the surface, they don't get suppressed and controlled, and they can actually end up in expression. And you're almost kind of going back in time, like Inception, like going back to the 4-year-old you, seeing yourself in the scenario with the thing that caused the wounding, and with your adult knowledge and your space and your strength and your consciousness, you're going back into the 4-year-old and you are completing the action that the 4-year-old should have taken, and thereby enforcing the boundary. And so there's a whole inner meditative process where you can start to do that. And so you become really acquainted with the root of the trauma. And as you learn to feel that, accept that, the trauma, which was a stuck, frozen spot of energy, which was causing a lot of kind of erratic, reactive behavior way up here on the surface, it's always a frozen bit of incomplete energy. And you breathe life into it, breath, consciousness, and you allow that trauma to unfold and be felt, and you go through all the emotions that it needs to go through, the grief, the sadness, the anger, the rage, the fear, the terror, whatever's down there. You feel every layer of that emotion, and then the trauma will unfold, and that stuck energy will start to unfold and infuse itself into the rest of your system, and the trauma is no longer there. So that's how we work it over time. if you've got a life where you've got other modalities, you have a regular shadow work or a therapy, you have breath work, you have retreats every now and then, you have deep friendships of virtue, compassionate spaces where you can talk about your process and feel it as it comes up, bit by bit, the tops of your traumas, the depths of your traumas, they can unfold. And I know so many hundreds of beautiful men and women who are deeply engaged in this, and it's an ongoing work to go down there to meet. You've got inner children. Remember, it's so many different stages of development, but bit by bit you address another one and another one and another one. And every time you go in and you do that, maybe the scary and confronting work of facing some of the deep emotional blockages and volatility that's in there. Well, I had a teacher, trauma teacher once, who called that the notion of pesos. It's like your Super Mario, and at some point you need to drop down the pipe into the depths of your psyche, but every time you unfreeze a trauma, you collect another peso, another gold coin. And in the end, when you've got 100 pesos, let's say you've done enough sessions and unblocking of stuckness and trauma in your body, you've got this great big bag of pesos, and you can come back through the pipe and upgrade into the next level of consciousness, the next level of being a robust and loving and present and safe and secure, grounded adult who can go back into the world and get on with beautiful things. More vibrancy, more natural emotionality, and the beautiful thing about having a very unlocked sense of adult presence and not many triggers is you don't really have to overthink going through life so much. When you meet life's challenges, the more you are unlocked, the more resourceful, the more pesos you have inside of you, the more you've got the appropriate resource to meet the particular life challenge that you're facing right now. Hope this has been useful. Stay tuned, subscribed to the channel for more deep dives and explanations like this. And if you particularly like my style and what I have to say, and you want to reach out for coaching with me for any particular aspect that you're moving through on your journey, I have a link to my calendar just below, and feel free to do that. All right, see you in the next video.